It's Thursday, July 31st, 2025. Big trade and economy news day. Nancy Pelosi comes out against insider trading and the curious case of Dr. Vinay Prasad. Next on the AM Update. President Trump made a big announcement yesterday, and this is a significant trade deal, reaching one with South Korea. He said in a post on Truth Social, quote, "I'm pleased to announce that the United States of America has agreed to a full and complete trade deal with the Republic of Korea. The deal is that South Korea will give the United States $350 billion of investments owned and controlled by the United States and selected by myself as president. Additionally, South Korea will purchase $100 billion of liquid natural gas or other energy products, and further, South Korea has agreed to invest a large sum of money for their investment purposes." So he's also said they've agreed to a tariff for South Korea of 15%. So tariffs for South Korea and agreeing to actually invest upwards of $500 billion into the United States. Also got news yesterday. The United States GDP grew by 3% year over year for the second quarter of this year. That was a surprise. It was quite a bit bigger, about 0.5%, more than 0.5% larger than what experts were predicting. Here's National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett, who says the White House is over the moon at the news.
It's really one of the best GDP announcements or releases that you could imagine, because there's blockbuster growth way above expectation, and there's also a real almost collapse in inflation. It went down by about 1.5% all the way down to 2.1%, which is the Fed's target. And so to have high growth with low inflation and also high income growth, personal income growth was 3%. That's just like about a sweet spot for a GDP release. And I will add that all of this happened while $127 billion in tariffs was raised, which is clearly not harming the American consumer. And we've been downsizing government in order to be more fiscally responsible. 70,000 federal jobs have been reduced, and there was a 5% reduction in federal government spending.
That's National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. Meanwhile, over at the Fed, they did not lower interest rates. However, something happened for the first time in 30 years. The Fed kept short-term interest rates at a level of 4.25% to 4.5% on Wednesday, but the vote saw a first double dissent from Fed board officials since the early 90s. 9 members of the Federal Open Market Committee agreed to keep rates where they are, but Fed Vice Chair of Supervision Michelle Bowman and Governor Christopher Waller, who are both in the running for President Trump's nomination to replace Fed Chair Jerome Powell, voted to lower the rates following an immense pressure campaign from President Trump. So the first time in over 30 years, we had a double defection at the Fed over whether or not to change interest rates. Well, this caught a lot of eyebrows yesterday. It caught a lot of eyes, too. That's the more important part. Texas's new congressional redistricting map dropped, and it basically gerrymanders. And yes, it's gerrymandering, but it's gerrymandering for a good cause. Gerrymanders 5 Democrat districts out of existence. If the legislature can pass this map and the courts don't strike it down, it'll result in 5 additional GOP seats in Congress. That means 5 fewer Democrat seats. Of course, the courts have recognized that gerrymandering and redistricting for political reasons to increase the number of districts is perfectly legal. We've had immense numbers of court cases. And don't come at me with, well, what if the Democrats do this? What if blue states do this? The answer is they already have. They don't have any more gerrymandering left to do. Republicans are finally getting smart and fighting back. Speaking of not smart people, Kamala Harris announced yesterday she's not running for governor of California. She said in a statement, quote, "In the United States of America, power must lie with the people, and we the people must use our power to fight for freedom, opportunity, fairness, and the dignity of all. I will remain in the fight, but not for governor of California." We continue to go back to Cincinnati. Yesterday, it was released a letter that was signed by every major restaurant owner in Cincinnati decrying the violence that city saw against individuals on the streets last Friday night. That's good to see, and we're going to need to see a lot more of that. Well, it was exposed yesterday morning that a sitting member of the city council went on Facebook and said those people who got their skulls beaten in deserved it. Corey Bowman, the half-brother of Vice President J.D. Vance and also running for mayor of Cincinnati, ignited outrage on X after exposing a disturbing social media post by Cincinnati council member Victoria Parks, who said the whites, quote, begged for that beatdown in downtown Cincinnati last weekend. This comes on the heels of Cincinnati Police Chief Teresa Theach's absurd attempt to downplay the black mob assault, raising very serious concerns, of course, about the city's woke leadership. Well, topic du jour, one of the topics du jour yesterday was the topic of insider trading. Here is President Trump at the White House calling out Nancy Pelosi.
You know, Nancy Pelosi became rich by having inside information. She made a fortune with her husband, and I think that's disgraceful. So in that sense, I'd like it, but I'd have to really see I study these things very carefully, and this just happened. So I'll take a look at it. But conceptually, I like it. And what I do think is Nancy Pelosi should be investigated because she has the highest return of anybody practically in the history of Wall Street, save a few. How did that happen? It happened by she knows exactly what's going to happen, what's going to be announced. She buys stock, and then the stock goes up after the announcement's made. And she ought to be investigated.
So there's President Trump at the White House yesterday responding to a new effort in Congress to ban insider trading, saying that Nancy Pelosi, of course, needs to be investigated. Well, just so happens Pelosi was on CNN yesterday afternoon, and Jake Tapper asked her about this.
So Nancy Pelosi became rich.
Why do you have to read that? We're here to talk about the 60th anniversary of Medicaid. That's what I agreed to come to talk about.
Yeah, but I wanted
what that means in the election.
I wanted to give you a chance just to respond. He accused you of insider trading. What's your response to that?
That's ridiculous. In fact, I very much support the trading of members of Congress. Not that I think anybody's doing anything wrong. If they are prosecuted and they go to jail. But because of the confidence it instills in the American people, don't worry about this. But I have no concern about the obvious investments that have been made over time.
Our lines laying down with lambs. There's Nancy Pelosi saying she's totally fine with a ban on insider trading for members of Congress. No, the real story is she already made her money. She's on the way out. So, of course, now we can ban insider trading now that it won't benefit me anymore. That's the real story. Well, I missed a couple of stories over the course of the week. We'll talk about those. The World Health Organization made a big revision to their narrative about the COVID jab. Also, fertility rate in the U.S. dropping yet again. And a curious story of love. That's coming up next. Well, who could have seen this news coming? This is a story from The Telegraph. I meant to include in the AM update earlier this week, but did not. This story is headlined, COVID vaccines saved far fewer lives than first thought. Subheadline, new study suggests true figure substantially more conservative than World Health Organization's 14.4 million global estimate in terms of lives saved. Here's an excerpt from that Telegraph story. Quote, last year, the World Health Organization claimed jabs had prevented the deaths of 14.4 million people globally in the first year alone, with some estimates putting the figure closer to 20 million. However, new modeling by Stanford University and Italian researchers suggests that while vaccines did save lives, the true figure was substantially more conservative and closer to 2.5 million people worldwide over the course of the pandemic. The team estimated that 9 of 10 prevented deaths were in the over 60s, with jabs saving just 299 people aged 20 and under, and 1,800 people aged between 20 and 30 globally. Overall, 5,400 people needed to be vaccinated to save one life. But in the under 30s, this figure rose to 100,000 jabs, according to this paper. It's an excerpt from that story from the UK Telegraph detailing this new study from Stanford University. You start doing the cost-benefit analysis as you go younger and younger and younger amongst the vaccinated. And the already admitted problems, especially when it comes to heart issues, that are known and prone to this vaccine, so-called, 100,000 jabs in those under the age of 30 to save one life. You start doing the cost-benefit analysis of that as you get younger and younger when it goes through the vaccinated population, and you start to get really angry what they tried to do to us and what they did do to us. Well, the fertility rate in the United States dropped to an all-time low in 2024 with fewer than 1.6 kids per woman. That's according to new federal data released late last week. The U.S. was, of course, once among only a few developed countries with a rate that ensured each generation had enough children to replace itself, 2.1 kids per woman. But has been sliding in America for close to 2 decades as more women are waiting longer to have children or never taking that step at all. The new statistic is on par with fertility rates in Western European countries, according to World Bank data. So that is, of course, not a surprising story. But I want to read you this thread from UK pastor Jamie Bambrick. It reads, quote, "In 2005, women in the country of Georgia averaged just 1.4 babies each, among the lowest in the world." This new story, this new data from the federal government, 1.6 kids, pretty similar. Pastor Bambrick continues on. They managed to raise this to 2.1 replacement rate by 2014, less than 10 years later, a 50% increase in under a decade. They are the only nation to successfully reverse declining birth rates. Here's how they did it. In 2007, the head of the Georgian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Ilya II, announced he would personally baptize and become the godfather of any third or higher order child. Since 2007, over 30,000 babies, 34.5% of third or higher births, have been baptized under this program. Yes, the government also supported this with child benefits and tax breaks, but their policies were little different from current ailing attempts of other nations. It was the religious push that drove the change. So why did it work? Well, men generally don't want to pressure their wives to go through more pregnancies and childbirths than they desire. This makes women the primary arbiter of the number of children born in marriage. When a woman wants to have more kids, Jamie Bambrick says, she does. But women are much less driven by economic concerns than men are, which is purely why economic policies, or just pure economic policies, don't work. Can you really imagine a woman deciding to have another child for an income tax break? Me either. What does drive women, however, is their social environment. They want to be accepted and thought well of by others. The genius of this program at the country of Georgia is that it restored the honor of motherhood. It didn't just make the role economically desirable, it made it socially desirable. That works much better than money. Now, there's a lot more to that thread. You can go read it from Pastor Jamie Bambrick over on X, at J_Bambrick, spelled just how it sounds. So there's the country of Georgia, 1.4 babies each in 2005. By 2014, 2.1 replacement rate, or just a little bit under, depending on who you go to for that source. A church led, in this case, the Georgian Orthodox Church and its patriarch. And what followed was a cultural shift. Really makes you go, Well, how about this? Saw this story the other day, caught my eye, courtesy of the New York Post. A woman fell in love with and married a hitchhiker she picked up on the side of the road. Maddie Kekmerisek, a 27-year-old, met Travis Becker, a 26-year-old, while she was traveling in Byron Bay, Australia. Maddie was driving back from a night out with her friend when she spotted Travis and his pal walking on the side of the road trying to hail a ride. Maddie pulled up and offered them a ride, and all four ended up spending the rest of the evening hanging out with Maddie and Travis from Sydney, hitting it off. But the pair, who both work for a corporate well-being business, forgot to get each other's numbers and had to track each other down on Facebook. They went on their first official date 2 weeks later and got engaged 18 months after meeting. Now celebrating 4 years married, the couple says they couldn't be more grateful that they got to meet. Maddie from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, U.S. said, "The way we met itself is wild. I knew I was going to build a life with him. My marriage is my most prized possession." I would not advise women to pick up men hitchhikers, but apparently this was just meant to be for Maddie and Travis. Isn't that an interesting story? Went all the way around the world, originally from Milwaukee, ended up in the land down under, met a hitchhiker, got married. 4 years later, things are going great. Well, what is the real story on Dr. Vinay Prasad? I want to tell you something right now. I have no idea. I've seen a lot of people claim that he was ousted from his role as chief vaccine policy officer, basically, for the FDA. He was ousted out of that role at the behest of Big Pharma. I've heard other people claim that it was actually he who approved, behind RFK Jr.'s back, some new Moderna product. Here's FDA Commissioner Marty Makary singing the praises of Dr. Vinay Prasad.
There was big news just last night with the departure of Dr. Vinay Prasad. He had been there as the director of the FDA Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. He was only there for 3 months. There was a lot that had happened, I would say, just over the last 3 or 4 days where he took some incoming, not the least of which was from the Wall Street Journal in an op-ed that they put out just saying that he was stopping innovation. He was opposed to some of these things. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the irony about that Wall Street Journal piece is that some of the drugs they criticized him for were not even in his center. He had nothing to do with them. And he did a tremendous amount of implementation of new policies in the time that he was at the FDA. I think the guy's a genius. He's published 550 scientific peer-reviewed studies in his career. He's 42 years old. So he gave us some of his time. He's got family in California. The commute was brutal. And then when he saw some of these sort of smear pieces, he didn't want to be a distraction. So we're going to continue to talk to him. But we've got tremendous leadership there. Our top drug regulator, by the way, was not that role. Our top drug regulator is filled by this new guy, George Tidmarsh, MD, PhD, double fellowship trained in neonatology and oncology, and led La Jolla Therapeutics. So he is a drug developer himself. I think 7 different drugs he developed himself. He knows the FDA from both sides, and he's an academic with impeccable credentials from Stanford.
What will happen? Who's going to be coming in to replace Dr. Prasad?
So, look, we have a lot of interest from talented people, so we'll take a look at that interest. But we've got George Tidmarsh right now that sits as our top drug regulator.
So there is FDA Commissioner Marty Makary saying he thinks Dr. Vinay Prasad is a genius and that he did a lot of good things in the 3 months he was there. That's going to be the final word on Dr. Vinay Prasad. I thought he was the one who came up with Dr. Makary and started to pull back some of the messaging on the COVID jab. But I've also seen conflicting reports about him from the world of Make America Healthy Again. And finally, poll of the week, I asked you on the economy, are you very pessimistic, optimistic, or very optimistic? In 4th place, very pessimistic, I should say, at 8%. In 3rd place, very optimistic at 10%. 2 points better than very pessimistic. In 3rd place, pessimistic at 24.4%. And in 1st place, just optimistic at 57.3%. Few responses from you. Gary says, until government gets its finances in order, hardships will continue to trickle to the public. Also going to see another bailout in agriculture again this year, in my opinion. Last straightforward farming podcast, while crude has been great insight into agriculture, if interested. Okay, cool. If you're a farmer, straightforward farming podcast, Gary says, is one to listen to. And he says, ag may be getting a big bailout soon. Steph says, all companies are in layoff mode. Hiring is stagnant and salaries are dropping. Wouldn't be optimistic until that changes. Depending on where you look in different sectors of the economy, different sectors of the hiring market, yeah, you can make a case that, Steph, what you just laid out there is more the prevailing wind than the optimist. Kay Adkins says, optimistic that improvements are on the way because Trump will want to leave a legacy. Yeah, I think so. And Dr. Wizard said, was more optimistic until Trump began to saying he would shovel free money to everyone just like he did before destroying the country with COVID and losing the election because of it. Free money is rocket fuel for inflation. Yeah, I think the Josh Hawley tariff rebate check thing, brilliant politics. I don't care if it was 3 months ago or right now, because this electorate loves it some free money. Now, it's totally morally reprehensible, I think. I mean, it's a gimmick, totally. I don't think it's actually going to come to pass, though. I don't think we're actually going to see COVID rebate checks. That's going to do it for Thursday. Back at it again tomorrow for Ask or Tell Me Anything. You can ask me any question you want. Tell me any news story you think needs covered on the AM Update. Make your submissions. Look for the pin post at Real AM Update on X. See you again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.